Hello and welcome to the next episode of The Podcast, a cannabis podcast for budding enthusiasts. As always, you're joined by your boy Heavy Days here from the Upside Down Library, and we are incredibly grateful to all of our sponsors. Seeds here now. Number one seed bank in the industry, all the greatest breeders, the hottest drops, the latest strains, anything you could want, they got it. And they offer a guarantee on satisfaction, not just germination. Check them out, guys. They got what you need. Likewise, huge shout out to our friends at Koppert Biological Systems, with everything you need to ensure that your harvest is pumping on all pistons, firing on all cylinders, and giving you the highest grade harvest to date, free of pests, pathogens, with their wide range of beneficial predators, including the Aphiparm and the Spidex Vital. They'll keep your garden happy and healthy. Huge shout out to our homies holding down the fort down under, Top Shelf Seed Bank and Organic Gardening Solutions. For all the greatest breeders, for all the best organic gardening products, check them out. It's the organic products I use and the seed bank that I sell my stuff through. And last but not least, the Patreon gang. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The one and only. We could not make episodes happen without you. If you would like to get early access to upcoming episodes, exclusive unreleased content, bonus episodes with Bob Hemphill, Mean Gene, Bodie, 707 Seed Bank, Trichome Jungles, the list goes on, please consider checking out the Patreon, www.patreon.com/thepodcast. On this episode, we are incredibly grateful to be joined by both C-Ray and Scabby of White Buffalo Seeds. Legends of the Canadian scene, old school landrace preservers, hunters, appreciators, and heck, if you've ever had the Roberts Creek Congo, you owe these guys a thanks. Here to chat all things breeding, genetics, upcoming crosses, plans for the future, old clone history, so much more. Let's just get into it. Alrighty, my friends, we're back for another one. And today we are incredibly grateful to be joined by the crew behind White Buffalo Seeds, landrace legends in their own right, maintaining one of the most unique collections of cultivars I've seen. Thank you so much to C-Ray and Scabby of White Buffalo Seeds for joining us today.
Hey guys, hey everyone, how's it going?
Nice to be here.
The first question we love to ask all our guests, what have you guys been smoking on today?
We're just generally smoking some stuff that we just grew. We're just testing out some of our new hybrids. One of them is Irene Cross Original Haze. It's a really nice one. And another one is the Congolese Cross Iraqi Pilgrim. And some other stuff that we just harvested, like Angola Red. What else have you been smoking on?
I just rolled up Angola Red and Irene Haze, and I was peeking a little bit there, but we're coming into the zone. We're gonna land right in there. Yeah.
I am thoroughly jealous right now because as someone who loves sativas, but like most people, doesn't have a ton of them hanging around to smoke, that sounds like exactly where I want to be. I was interested, I'm probably going to ask you a bunch of questions about all those varieties because they all sound great, but the first one would be the Irene Cushion Cross the Haze. It sounds like it's more leaning to the haze side, is it?
That one's pretty balanced, I would say, because apparently the Irene is a self progeny. So self progenies in crosses tend to be reasonably consistent in the offspring. So yeah, that one actually turned out really well. Like as far as uniformity from plant to plant to plant, we grew about 16 females, so pretty good sample, and we ended up keeping about probably a dozen of them to check out again, to grow again.
Lovely. I'm going to have to ask you some more questions about your pheno hunting, but just to confirm for everyone listening, are we talking about the Irene OG or a different Irene?
Yeah, it's well, I don't know if it's an OG per se, but it's it's an OG-ish plant, but it's like a Kush.
Yeah. Does it have the weird buds growing from like the internode?
I've only grown it twice, and I didn't experience that yet. But you mean like little budlets that grow off the stems or something?
Yeah, I've just heard people saying that you get like these weird little buds growing at the internodes on Irene. I was just curious if you'd experienced that at all.
Not yet.
I think that's like a phosphorus thing, if I remember.
No,
right,
like
no?
potassium.
Oh, potassium.
High
yeah.
potassium.
Yeah.
You can grow buds right off the stalk if you hit them with the right type of potassium at the right time, apparently.
There you go. That's some cool info I wasn't aware of. I like that. What was it about the Irene that drew it to you? Because I think if we look at your work, there's often sort of an older world strain and sometimes a newer world strain. And I'd be interested in hearing like what sort of characteristics of the modern strain attract you. Like, I haven't seen you grow a cookies hybrid, but the Irene is pretty modern. What do you like about it?
Well, we've only grown it a couple times. It's just one of those things you grow it and you taste it and it's like, this is the good shit. And
the terps, yeah, definitely the terpenes are what is most interesting.
This is, and it's got a good high, for being, we're kind of critical about more of the commercial indica push type stuff. In that because we're really sativa connoisseurs. So we expect all our plants to have some sort of profundity in the stone, that's what our goal is. So this the Irene's actually got a little bit of got a decent heavy effect to it.
Yeah, it's like an easy man high, after you get up the little rocket boost there for a minute or two, and then it's nice and easy, right? You're grooving down the street.
Yeah, I love the sounds of that. And you know what? Just based on hearing that, I'm confident it's the Irene cut I'm thinking of, because that's what everyone says. They were like, above all, like the high on this plant is exquisite. So that all makes sense.
I think the bud shape is not very alluring to most people, and I think the Iraqi kind of the haze kind of stepped that up a bit in that cross for sure.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful stuff there. And while we're on the topic of haze, I had a few different questions. I guess I'd be interested in asking, I know that you guys have worked with many different hazes over the years, both, some of Neville's work with like the Haze A and Haze C progeny, and I think you guys have even worked with some of the original stuff from Sam himself. I'd be interested to hear, does that all check out? And is there one sort of stock of haze that you think is better to the other, or it's all just like a family?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it all came from skunkman stock. What everyone's growing. There's obviously stuff that people say predates that, but what everyone refers to as original haze came through the seedsman. Well, not all of it, but I think he sold a bunch privately. Skunkman sold a bunch of seeds privately before that, but a lot of this stuff came through the seedsman company, seed company or whatever. If you go onto archive.org and look up seedsman.com and go back to it's I don't know, it's like a couple of years after the earliest entries, you'll see the original release of the the skunkman's breed that he did at that time, which is like a bunch of original haze, and there was a few land races, and then there was a bunch of crosses, and there was I think some Afghani,
South Indian, Afghani,
Durban.
Kerala.
Yeah, that was the South Indian.
I think that's about it. Oh, probably more.
Yeah, there's a few. Anyways, you'll find it on archive.org. It's pretty interesting to go back and look at that.
Yeah, nice. And when you say seedsman, are you talking about like the generic label that the seed bank offers, or like Sam's?
That's right. No, I mean, I'm talking the original, like the seed bank seedsman. I believe, like, I don't know the story, but I've heard, bits of the story that it was like a collab between, either it was a collab or it was started with, basically it was started with Skunkman seeds. Like that's what got it going. And he had like a kilo. He had like, that guy bought like a kilo of all the different varieties, I think is the story. And I don't think it lasted very long, because if you look at archive.org, you can kind of see where like it was like a couple of years of Skunkman stuff, and then it kind of transitioned to a bunch of Dutch stuff.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I do think I remembered hearing that story from Todd, so that all sort of checks out. I'd be interested to hear, in terms of your experience with the hazes, have you seen stuff come out of it that is similar to some of the well-known stuff, like the black Cuban haze, a really famous NL5 haze cutting? Do you ever see any of the characteristics in the haze you've worked with that seems similar to the other famous haze work, or it all seems like quite unique?
Well, we've grown the original haze stock from a few different sources now, like 4 or 5 different sources. And every one you dip into is different. It all depends on, because everyone started with a small subs, a sub selection of original haze. They got 10 seeds or whatever. So based on luck of the draw, everyone got a little bit, and then they selected, certain things. So there's quite a bit of variation in our experience, and like most of them are not worth growing in in our opinion. Like you really have to find the right bag of seeds, and to get the really good ones that are worth growing. Like most of them, like 99% of them, most people would not want to grow.
Okay, yeah, that's brilliant, because it sort of parlays into the next part of the question that I was going to ask, which was that the impression I always got from the work that came from Neville's haze stuff was that although he got like a small number of seeds or males or whatever it was from Sam, it seemed like the males he got ended up being pretty bloody good. Is that like your perspective on it?
That's a good question. Like, I mean, I've grown a few of Neville's things, but I mean, obviously they were good because they stood the test of time, and we grow some of that stuff. Like we have some NL Hayes seeds that are good. So I don't know. I don't know if like I don't really know the difference. I mean, I can figure it out, the difference between the A and the C male, just because we've grown a little bit of both. Like we haven't grown the C5 or the A5 cutting, but we've grown C5 F2s, and we've grown the A5 BX from Karma, BX1, I guess it was.
Yeah.
So, we have a rough idea. They're definitely very different males. Like the A5 is really savory and kind of charcoaly. That's what I get out of it, like charcoal and like woody incense. Whereas the C5 side is sweet, flowery, like perfumey.
Well, pencil shavings, I wanted to say.
Oh, wait, pencil shavings
on the last
on the C5, yeah.
on the C5.
Yeah.
Yeah, that checks out. I've been lucky enough to try both of those, and your descriptions fairly perfectly fit it.
I smoked a bunch of the stuff of like a bunch of haze, like what they call haze in Amsterdam. So I probably have smoked both of those when I was there, because I was smoking stuff from like Neville's buddy, the Steve. He had something, and a bunch of dispensaries at that time. Like, I don't know. I assume some of them had the real deal, like real deal, whatever. that they were just marketing as NL haze at the time.
Sure.
So I don't know. I can't confirm without going back in a time machine, but
I mean, out of curiosity, I've always found that people tend to fall on one side of the fence. They're either like, I love the Haze C or I love the Haze A. And notably, a lot of the breeders I speak to, they all say the Haze A. They're like, yeah, that Colombian sort of vibe. Whereas I myself, I love the Haze C, that more Thai, floral sort of thing. Do you have one you fall more preference-wise?
I think I'm in the C side of things.
Yeah, I like both qualities, but yeah, see.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And actually, you know, the BC sweet skunk cutting, the Breeder Steve cut, that one is very C5 dominant, very C5 dominant. Like after growing those C5 F2s and then like revisiting that cutting, it's really obvious that like originally when the sweet skunk was sold by Mark Emery, he marketed as SNC Seeds Big Skunk Cross Grapefruit, but the original story was that Steve got a tray of cuttings and there was a male and they weren't like.
Yeah, it ended up being males instead of females, something like that, and that's where that male came from.
Yeah, and they figured out later on it was an NL Hayes male
that made the sweet skunk.
Yeah, that's definitely the story he told me, and it checks out. I sadly haven't been able to try sweet skunk, but it looks like NL5 haze, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it's very NL5 haze, Tom. Like
you'll like it. It's a good smoker. We have way better ones, I think, now as we've worked down the lines in terms of qualities that are better for growing, like hardiness, powdery mildew, ease of growth, flowering time, stuff like that. But it's definitely a good one. Cut your teeth on.
Another plant we grew that was what I would think would be like the A5 is the Band-Aid haze, number 7.
What was your thoughts on that one? It's pretty popular.
It's all right, but it's like we have better stuff in our collection that we like personally more. So it's a good plant. A lot of people like it. So
there was a newer pheno that I tried that I liked way better too. The Band-Aid haze too.
Yeah, our friend down the road here, he got a pack of 10 original Band-Aid haze F1s, I believe they were.
Yeah, I think so.
And he just grew them out, and he must have got 2 packs. Oh no, maybe there must have been like more than a pack there or something. Anyways, the number 12 was really nice, like better than for us. It was better than the number 7.
Number 2. Was it 2? Yeah, I think it was 2, wasn't it? Or was it 12? I can't remember.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
I got it on a jar back there, I think. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
No, that makes sense, right? Like it must have been 2 packs if it was number 12 there. And I think I've seen people posting. Did he give that out at all? That might be a cutting that gets passed around now.
No, he just popped those recently.
Yeah, it was more recent kind of thing. The high on the new one is like very you smoke it and then it's like very immediate up and you're like, holy shit, and then it comes into a better relaxed high, but I find it's a much better high than the 7 people junk around.
I'd be interested to hear, because you mentioned that you said, yeah, look, it's good, but we've got some better stuff. I was actually looking at some Band-Aid haze crosses going, is this the sativa I've been searching for? It sounds like you guys have got other ones that might be more up my lane if I'm looking for that racy sativa sort of thing. What might be some recommendations from your catalogue for someone like me who wants that sort of effect?
Well, everything.
Yeah, we really tried it. Like, we really sample everything. We really go by the highs and the smells, those are the things that we really go by. And we smoke, we like to smoke. So, yeah, that's something that we really try to, involve in everything we do. Personally, I enjoy the Colombian or the Angola Red, Colombian Black Haze. Some of those were really awesome, but you find it in lots of different stuff that we have, in various mixtures.
Yeah, everything we have has been well tested, and like we've gone through and made sure that it was up to it's basically what we're looking for in a smoke. And yeah.
Interesting. Look, I know our listeners are going to heckle me if I don't get some more sort of indoor friendly ones out of you? What, like, for someone who's, because that's the complaint I hear. Like, I'm like you guys, right? Like, I'm trying to get people to grow sativas, and they always say, you know, I'm growing indoor, it's tough. Do you have something that's like quite indoor friendly or manageable?
Oh yeah, like we have Congolese cross Iraqi is actually sativa dom, but it's very manageable. Our Iraqi Pilgrim, we grew out 3 packs, so like 36 seeds, and there was 2 males in there that were semi-auto. That there's a few more that were semi-auto, but there was 2 good semi-auto males that I specifically used in the pollination of those crosses. So they're very they're a lot faster.
Yeah, I kicked down on everything for sure, and it passed on uber good qualities to everything it touches. A lot that Congo clone is really easy for a sativa, 9 or 10 weeks, and you're good to go. So it satisfies most of the guys who are, looking for something newer to try that's not so low.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Congolese is a very good commercial plant. And most of the guys that grow it commercially, they cut it at 9 or 10 weeks. Even though you can, there's a whole range of, you can cut it early or you can let it go a little bit later. But it's actually better terp-wise in the early part. Like most people would prefer it at 9 or 10 weeks because it has more of the lemon peel terps at the beginning.
Yeah, boot polish, lemon boot polish. Yeah, good shit.
We're going to get to the Congo later because I love that cutting. Thank you guys so much for that. But I just want to loop back quickly to the Iraqi Pilgrim stuff you were talking about. And you mentioned that it was semi-auto flowering. Do you mean that in sort of the way that some, like I know that, for example, blueberry is a bit like that, where it's like once it gets root bound, it just tries to flower. Is that sort of what you're talking about? Or do you mean like in a true sense, it's a bit auto-flowery?
I have a very basic definition of semi-auto. Semi-auto is something that triggers and that it'll start flowering, but you can re-veg it. So if it's auto, basically you can't re-veg it. You can re-veg auto stuff like with a bunch of techniques. But semi-auto you can re-veg with pretty normal techniques.
Yeah, time and size of bucket,
Yeah, or just take cuttings, re-veg cuttings.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds like sort of what I was thinking. Like just, I guess some strains I'm familiar with fall under that category, and I just call them a bit temperamental, but worth keeping around. But
the Iraqi Pilgrim is it's what I would call a pseudo landrace. Well, it's not even really a pseudo landrace, but it could be a pseudo landrace because if you look at the description for it on Seed Heaven, the guy that collected the seeds, he went on a tour of Iraq and he just collected seeds from everywhere that were good and put them in a bag. So it's got a little bit of everything. So yeah, when we grew them, most of them weren't. They were okay, but most of them were not things we would grow again. Unfortunately, we found a good female and a good male, and the rest is history. And we made F2s out of those, so we got what we needed.
That's awesome. I was going to specifically ask, I noticed on the website that you did F2 it, and I was wondering, was that just to have like a bigger pool to select from, or was there like a specific reason you did that?
Well, it was because it was good. That's the main reason to make more seeds when you come across something good.
Sorry, maybe I should be more specific. Was there a reason you didn't just use like an F1 male and you went for the F2 male instead?
Well, the more inbred something is, the more you're able to predict what the outcome is. So I'm always trying to, increase the predictability in the hybridization. So my goal is always to, if I have a choice between an inbred male and a not inbred male, I'm always going to choose the inbred male, unless there's some specific reason that I want to choose the other one. But yeah, it's always preferable to the male side of of your hybrid equation is always the one that has the most questions. So I like to use something that's inbred, because then we can, if we have something that's inbred, we've grown it before, and it's relatively consistent from plant to plant, then we have like an idea of what that male is going to be like. More of an idea, basically.
Yeah, phenomenal. And I guess one of the sentiments you hear commonly expressed when people are talking about using inbred males is that the more inbred a line is, the more it tends to dominate the cross. Do you find that to be the case, or is it more like what you just said before, where it's just more predictable but not necessarily dominating?
I think it depends on what it is. It really depends on what it is. Is it like some things that are like that are blueberry. Blueberry's super dominant in hybrids.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the blueberry vision was when we grew that out. Yeah, you could see the dominance like kicking down halfway or more all the time, and something I didn't like preferably, but yeah, definitely a dominant one.
But some things are not non-dominant, and actually for breeding, sometimes you want a non-dominant male, because like let's say you're doing a shotgun breed where you have a male and you're loading your room up with everything that you can get your hands on. Then by having a non-dominant male, then you're allowing all those other things to express themselves in the hybrids, and you're not ending up with a bunch of stuff that's really similar or more similar.
I think that's such a valid and valuable point, because I always try to say to people, I think probably upwards of 90% of the time, when the average person buys a seed, they're buying it for the mother. Like, they want that clone-only sort of mother, like, most of the time. Of course, there's some variation, but that's why what you just said is perfect, right? Like, if you've got a father that just allows the mum to shine through, then you can give people sort of the clone-only that they can't get their hands on.
Well, that's a tricky question, because clone onlys are often like polyhybrids. They're just weird things that are not going to ever pop up again. Like sweet skunk, the plant we were talking about, for instance, we've tried breeding with that so many times, and what comes out of it is never as good as the original cut. So we've just eliminated that from our breeding program at all, completely.
Yeah.
A long time ago. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. So I guess that ultimately you refine your females you work with over the years to be ones that work well in the breeding sense, not just like it's a popular cultivar.
Yeah, that's where we're always looking for stuff that works well as breeding, like in hybridization. Like a good trait in hybridization is a plant that the hybrids are better than the original. And one plant that is like that, is very reliable like that for us, is the grapefruit cutting, the BC grapefruit cutting. Pretty much anything that you put onto it, if it's half decent, you'll end up with something cool that's going to be more fun to grow than the grapefruit.
And how do you find the grapefruit is in general? Because obviously it's like this popular strain. It's been around ages. Do you think that the smoke itself is good, or it's more what you said, that it's a good tool for the next step?
It's all right. It's it's not super potent or anything, but it's really nice. It's got a nice flavor. It's the kind of weed that a lot of people like to smoke, because it's like savor weed, weed that you just smoke to savor it. And it's not like super potent. So, there's a lot of people that they don't want to get whacked out of their head. They just want to smoke something that's really nice, that's got a bit of a relaxing high to it. And
it yields well too, is the other thing.
Yeah, it's a really big yielder. And it's fast.
Yeah. Fast.
Like they used to harvest it at 6 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember I used to be skeptical of the 49-day Cindy 99, but you got that beat.
Well, it wasn't necessarily,
good weed. Yeah. Our South Asian brothers.
It's the same in Australia. Out of curiosity, I've spoken to Steve in the past, and I said, "What do you think grapefruit was?" And he said, "I think it's just an Afghani." What do you think? And are you friends with Steve? Because
Yep.
I noticed you had the grapefruit cut, and I was like, I don't think even he has it anymore.
My opinion is it's an NL hybrid.
Okay.
Yeah, we've known Steve a long time. He's a real good guy. He's brought lots to the table over the years, and he loves to talk. He's got that big booming voice, and people like to listen to him.
That is the best description of his voice, isn't it? Very booming.
Yep.
He's one of the grandfathers.
Yeah, he's like in the grandfather category for sure. You better respect.
So I just want to link back for a moment. You were talking about the Iraqi pilgrim, and you answered this in the question that I think you sort of said you got it off a website. But our listeners are always curious to know, where do you source your landrace seed from? Is it always sort of just haphazard, or do you have like a go-to method of trying to get new stock, or is it just sort of opportunistic?
A lot of it is just random.
Very random, yeah.
Some of I actually like buying seeds personally. Like when I see land races on the Real Seed Company, I like to buy a lot of stuff from them. And like everything I buy, I'll buy 3 packs minimum, because there's so much variation in that stuff that you really need to dig through multiple packs to find stuff that to get a really good idea of what's going on there, and to figure out what you're looking for. Or you either that or you're really lucky.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like the Real Seed Company. I'm a big fan of those guys, and like all the guys in India, the Indian land race guys.
I was just going to ask. You beat me to it.
Yeah. We've got some stuff from them through other people have sent us that we're going to be dipping into at some point.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like random people, contact us and trade us stuff.
Yeah, it's like people from Angola, that have lived there, just get a hold of us, see our stuff, send us a bunch of seeds to try. And yeah, like lots of sharing back in the CW days, lots of sharing back then,
Yeah, and some of our friends have been traveling around, and they'll bring back seeds. Like one of our friends was in Kenya, and he took the last plane out before they shut down, for
COVID.
Yeah, for COVID, and he had a bunch of seeds he said, yeah, I got some seeds from some Rasta in Kenya.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And I think that's sort of the way most breeders I speak to get their seeds. It's sort of just like where you can. You mentioned the Angola, and we actually had a listener submitted question, and they were just curious. They said, what's the difference between the 2 different Angolas you use? I think one's the number 13, one's the number 18 from memory.
Yeah. Well, smell and high for one, and varying rate of intersex traits.
You want to explain where they came from?
Yeah, they came from. They were sent to me from La Mano Negro's collection. His wife, Katerina, and it was given to him from a guy who sailed ships up the coast to what was the name of that island?
Capo Verde.
Capo Verde, I think. Yeah. So like a sea captain from Capo Verde, I guess, gave him the seeds, and they were sent out to us after he passed. And
that guy was like getting seeds at places where they were like oil refinery.
Yeah, like
places.
the big oil refineries, going up and down the coast, and just collecting things that he had liked.
Yeah, he wasn't like, he was just he'd buy weed and get the seeds from coastal ports, so he wasn't like in the bush sampling all the plants.
No. And most of it was like garbage. Like a lot of it was garbage, very heavily intersexed. And the 13 was more earthy pea kind of smells I liked, and very little intersex. And the 18 was more of a citrus thing. Like it had a higher citrus. Like you get that citrus out of the 13 too, but it's like muted a bit. It stands out a little more in the 18. So yeah, I just decided to keep both of those smells around for future projects.
Yeah, nice. And like, is there a certain variety that the strain, the effect is similar to? Like, if you were to say like, oh, if you like super silver haze, you'll like this. Obviously, super silver haze, bad example, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, like I put it in a category called a spiritual high, I guess. Not to get too like wavy gravy or anything, but different people have different experiences with cannabis, and one of them is definitely spiritual. I'd say in the way you can connect to yourself, to that inner voice, right, kind of thing. And I'd say that those Angolas and like the Malawis and the stuff like that, it seemed to have that really up high that's introspective and friendly, not too racy.
Yeah, we're looking for stuff that's not necessarily racy, but more like a creative high, a creative and like positive.
Yeah.
Opens up your heart chakra kind of stuff, like your heart chakra and your throat chakra and your third eye chakra, etc.
Yeah, beautiful. I've always felt like they're a really underrepresented sort of sativa, most often sativa. And I think I probably haven't thought about this enough really, but I always sort of would tell my friends, like, I feel like there's two types of sativas. There's like the one that annihilates you and makes you paranoid and just like, oh, what am I doing? And then there's like the real clear-headed one that's sort of more like what you're talking about, where it's like you're not riddled with anxiety and you're like actually upbeat and having a good time and feeling like, hey, I'm really connecting with this actually. Yeah, definitely an underserved strain in sort of a type of strain in our community, I think.
Turn some music up in my head. Like those are the kinds of things I look forward to. The beat that's going, it kind of takes it.
Yeah, I like to count the number of different ringing sounds in my head. And if you get more than 2 or 3 different sounds, you're onto a good one.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I think Scabby just mentioned the Malawi. I mean, I did want to ask you about that quickly, just because you don't really see people outside of, say, like yourself and maybe like Ace or Cano Biogen really playing around with the Malawi. Where'd you get yours from, and how would you describe it to people? Is it like a haze or more like a different sort of sativa?
The earthy African.
Yeah, those Africans, they're not like long flowering sativa types. They're like in the shorter, like 10, 12 range, so it's a bit more manageable in terms of the time length. And yeah, you can find some really, really interesting things in there, but you've got to look through a bunch of seed, make some F2s.
But to further answer your question, we got the seed from
mano negra.
Yeah, so the same stock as what those guys use.
Yeah. I was sent a big package after he passed that his wife made up for me, and there still is a bunch of his old stuff in there. We've gone through quite a bit of it, but yeah, he had a really good touch, and he had with plants, and yeah, I definitely respect his collection, and I'm glad that we can share some things, with the world.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so yeah, it's up there with that same proven sort of stock that the other guys have played with.
Yeah, there's what was that guy? The guy that was selling African seeds out of the UK that passed away like 7 years ago. Afro Pips.
Oh yeah.
Afro Pips. He had in Malawi as well, but I haven't experienced that. And it's like all things. When you get into those types of seeds, you have to grow a bunch of them or be lucky to get the really experience what it is you want to experience, to get to find the really good Malawi or whatever.
Yeah, so if you're like a cash cropper, that's not the kind of thing you're going to want to like enjoy it all. But if you're someone who loves cannabis, these are important lessons to learn and important things to share and pass on, or to youth.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so take me back, guys. We might have to get 2 independent stories here. What was your first experience with cannabis?
Well, my first experience of wondering what cannabis was in the late 80s. I was in something called the Navy League Cadets, which was like basically like Cub Scouts with a Navy theme. And I was in the band, and one of the officers one day, we're up there with the band, and he's for some reason he's talking about hemp rope, and he said, yeah, this hemp rope is made from the same plant as marijuana. And then he had this really goofy smile on his face when he said it. And my I think I was like 10 or 11 years old, and just the way he said this is from the same plant as marijuana, and had this big smile on my face. I knew there was something about that, but it wasn't until I was in my I'm kind of late to the scene. Yeah, basically when I was around 19 or 20 is when I finally smoked it for the first time. And actually the first few times I smoked it, it was probably just the particular type of weed that it just was not, that wasn't for me. But once I found, like, I made a new friend who was a big pothead, and he properly introduced me to it when I was about 21 in Vancouver, when I moved there for the second time. So yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, when I was younger, I lived in a fishing village on the East Coast, and we would get bricks of hash that would wash up on the shore or out from the fishing boats from runners that would go by. So we would go up in our little camps in the woods and get some hot knives going, and we do these saltwater hash dabs, right? And they were pretty gross now that I look back on it. And they used to call us animals and stuff like that. But no, it was really fun. And one of the first weeds I ever really loved was a guy that was on my island had been growing for a long time, and he had been inbreeding this Maui Wowie that was finishing, and it would just get you fucking licked, And unfortunately, he died in a car accident, and I never got to. As I got older, I never got to get those seeds from him. But I grew with him a year or two and learned some things, and he put me on my way. I think I was maybe 14 or 15 at that time. But yeah, I knew that weed would be a part of my life, like you have the drinkers and the weeders. And as soon as you experience some of those awesome highs, yeah, I knew it would be a part of my life.
Wow. That's cool. You got that sort of mentoring so early on, and I think my new phrase is going to be like, don't tell me you're heady unless you've done a saltwater hot knife. That's great. That's cool. And it's one of those ones where it's like, people will hear that and find it funny, but it's like, it would have given you this type of high that you just don't experience anywhere else, like, as well as the set and setting, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. And we were really close to Montreal too, so you'd have a lot of different hashes coming, like the east coast of Canada it was all hash, right? So guys would go to work in the factories and they'd buy their quarter ounce or half ounce of hash for the week and mix it with their tobacco or whatever. Weed wasn't really a big thing on the East Coast like it was on the West Coast when I came to the West Coast, And that's changed over the years now, but that's just the smuggling routes, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, like hash was traditionally not very popular in Western Canada, except for places that you couldn't get good weed. Like, I grew up in the prairies, and there was, like, I never saw weed when I grew up. I only saw people doing hot knives. That was my only experience of, like, or I would smell people smoking really rough joints on the street, like, and wondering what, I would smell that stuff and wondering what the heck was going on there, because that didn't quite smell like a cigarette. But I never, like, where I grew up, I grew up with the motor, like the muscle car crowd, and we weren't really big into smoking weed. We were into heavy metal and drinking booze, more or less.
And so I be interested to hear, C. Ray, what was the moment that you realized cannabis? Because it sounds like it wasn't until a bit later on. So what was the eureka light bulb turning on moment for you where you were like, this is what I got to do?
Well, initially it was just, I was working as a machinist. So it was, for me, initially it was just a curiosity. And I just started growing. Like my first grow was under some stair, like a stairwell. And I made my own fluorescent fixture with like 6 little 2-foot long fluorescent bulbs. And it was like 2 foot by 2 foot square and maybe like 2 foot tall, just hardly any space. So yeah, I was more curious with, like I come from a line of farmers, on my mom's side of the family. So I'm kind of like a gardener farmer by nature. So I was just curious about growing it, and the fact that you could grow your own was pretty cool. But it wasn't really until maybe like 1998, I met a friend of mine I was going to school learning machine, like tool and die. I was learning tool and die, the trade. And I was at this school and they had this environmental kind of like 1-day environmental conference. And this one guy was there talking about hemp. And he just had he had all sorts of different things that you could make out of hemp and things that were made out of hemp. And just kind of blew my mind. At that point, I was like, whoa, this is pretty wild. Like that was a point where I started thinking about how it could be a part of my life, basically.
Wow. That's quite a unique one. Like I think most people, including myself, it's like after a really good hit. But you're at like a fair or something. That's pretty cool. Okay, cool.
Well, we were getting high the whole time too, but
okay. Well, that adds to it. So, what were some of the first strains you guys were growing when you started growing? And was this at the time when strains had names, or it was like just the kind or whatever?
Super Sativa Seed Club, like lots of that stuff was around. Yeah, Friesland, the old Friesland was some of the first stuff. Some of my buddies Maui Wowie, and we would just order whatever we could off Mark Emery's site or whoever's, the Dutch scene, the gray area, wherever, grew everything, just lots of different stuff. But that Friesland really finished outdoor in the East Coast, so you'd see that a lot around. Yeah.
Yeah, Scabby grew up on the East Coast and I grew up on the West Coast, so our experiences are a little different. I actually got to go into Mark Emery's little grow shop and buy seeds, so I knew all the varieties. I was a bit of a seed nerd at that time. But the first seeds that I grew were Sweet Skunk from Breeder Steve, Spice of Life Seed Company. And they were very different from the Select cutting. They were a lot more similar to grapefruit. They were like indica hybrids, more or less. So I think that the male that got used in that cross, looking back, was probably possibly an F1, or it had variation in it. And it was probably selected for indica traits, but it's spat out a little sativa phenol every so often. Because like what I got out of it was very thick kind of NL, like NL flavors, mixed with like savory, thick NL flavors mixed with very citrusy grapefruit flavors, which is pretty different than what the Breeder Steve cut is like.
And did you get the cutting like around that time, or it was much later you got it and you were like, oh, this is pretty different?
Yeah, I didn't grow it until the early 2000s.
Okay.
I don't think that cutting didn't merge till later, right?
No, yeah, it was a later thing.
Like I think I don't know if you told the story, Breeder Steve told the story, but I think something along the lines of they it's like they older, like it was some leftover stock that they
Mark Emery had, yeah.
Yeah, Mark Emery had that they grew and found that particular cutting in.
Is there a story like 1 in 500 or something? But I don't know. I've heard a couple things. It's best for Steve to like fill you in on that, guys.
Yeah, look, I can't remember specifically, but I'm sure it was a special plant.
Yeah, that's it, right? Yeah. The cowboy, maybe something like that, if I remember correctly. I don't know. It's been a long time.
Yeah, okay. And as a follow up for you, Scabby, I'd be interested to hear, out of all the SSSC you grew, which was the one you missed the most?
Oh, Jesus. Fuck. Honestly, that Friesland was some of my favorite stuff ever because there was phenos. Like I've tried phenos now in the future, and they just hit harder. There was like something, I don't know what the fuck happened, but something happened in their genetics. Like the stuff I'm getting nowadays, the pink freeze and stuff, all the other cuts that are around, they don't hit quite as hard as that old Friesland. Like it was a very narcotic buzz, right? And the weed was so potent, like it'd be drying in your house, and you'd like, I'm out of here, you know. You can't even stay in the house; it would make you sick, right? So yeah, and I don't know why it changed, but something definitely happened.
And you grew a bunch of that, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. And we grew it in the future too, like in the future, no, like around 2003 and stuff. We got a bunch of M39, M36, M38, and it was reproduction stuff. I bet, but it was all very uniform and the same, but no real punch.
Yeah, the original was probably an F1.
Yeah, that's probably what was happening, and like yeah, that same time when we first grew the what was that one by Steve that was so nice, the first seed lot he had out.
Plumba?
No, Shishkaberry.
Shishkaberry,
Yeah, that first seeds of Shishkaberry that we grew out, it was just really powerful and beautiful, and everything I ever tried after that, it just didn't stand up to it. But, now that I look back, that's probably what it was the F1ing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you have certainly nailed that Shishkaberry one on the head. I think it was either Steve or DJ. I can't remember which one because we've spoken to them both in the past, and they said that it was like the male they use. It's gone down and like there are like fans who can quote this male too. It's like B150 something, but it's got like a label and people know it, and it's like it made some incredible stuff. It was like that first Shishkaberry, as well as the other stuff when they were doing that, when DJ and Steve were doing that work together. It's kind of impressive, I guess, that like your palate picked up on that on its own.
Well, yeah, that's one of the fun things about weed is we're bioessaying all this stuff, and we're building our little computer in our brains, you know, and that's the real fun thing to me. Like we have all these THC limits, and you know this terpene and that terpene, but to me, and I think the funnest thing is just building your own library in your brain, you know, and the smells, the memories that the smells kick out, you know, that take you back, or
in your etheric brain.
In my etheric brain, yeah, definitely.
So moving forward, what was the first cross you guys made individually or together? But I also want to know, tell me about the cross. Was it intentional or was it like a happy accident?
My original seeds that I ever made were actually just sweet skunk F2s. Just the only reason I did it was to see if I could do it. And I grew some out, but I don't even know because I was so inexperienced at the time. Like some of the stuff I was doing, I would laugh my ass off at some of the shit I was doing back then. But I mean, I was only 20 years old or whatever, 21 or whatever. And I kept to myself, so I wasn't I wasn't in the scene learning cannabis cultivation techniques from other guys that could have taught me some good shit. I was like just reading gardening books because I wasn't that serious about it at that point. But I was it was just a curiosity for me.
Some of the first ones for me, excuse me, would be like unintentional stuff almost. We were doing a lot of guerrilla growing at the time out in the wilderness, and it was very cold back there. So I would come back in the springtime and, oh my God, I had some seeds that were growing up, from the old holes or whatever, right? Those were some of the first crosses. So they were like inbred Maui Wowie things that had been inbred for shortness over and over and over again in that season to get something to work. Yeah.
Nice. And as a follow-up, what was the first cross you did what was the cross you did where you looked at the end results and you were like, this is really good, like I need to sell this? And like, was that the first cross you brought to market, or was it just what?
It was right. We came through a weird time, like with prohibition and stuff. It was like a war zone, right? Like people were getting arrested everywhere and going to jail, and it was just fun to make seeds and share seeds and get it out there and stick one up to the man kind of thing. But I think it just grows into a lifestyle the more you do it and your aptitude for it. Like, he's really into gardening and stuff like that. So it's kind of a natural thing that comes about, I think, for both of us, really.
Yeah, I don't even remember. Like, I can't even honestly answer that question, to be honest, because I was young and I was just so stoned. Like when anything that I can think about related to cannabis, I was just so stoned at that time. Like, there's such a difference between the reasons I was smoking weed for back then and like my experiences of it back then and now, and like, or in the present era. So I was just just doing like just making a bunch of random stuff. But yeah, when I started working with when I worked with Reeferman, that's when I made a whole bunch of crosses, and invariably some of that stuff worked out, even though I was still not really fully understanding what I was doing, learning on the job kind of thing.
We've heard many people get such work experience, and I'd be interested to delve into that a little more. Like, I know that you got your start with sort of the Prairie Fire and Reefer Man days. What sort of genetics were you working with? And as you sort of just alluded to, were you aware of sort of the popularity the work was going to go on to receive, or was it all quite a surprise to you?
Well, I didn't really know Reeferman or of Reeferman. I just met him randomly. I was living on the Sunshine Coast. And I just met him one day, and we clicked, and he said, "Come work with me," and the rest is history. And I was just a guy, and I knew a little bit about growing weed and making seeds, enough to get by. And he basically, set the agenda. I was not part of that world of making seeds and selling seeds. So yeah, I just learned about all that stuff on the job, and figured things out just through trial and error. And eventually, we would get feedback from the seeds, and I've a somewhat of a good idea of what worked and what didn't work. But I didn't get to grow out, all of that stuff, so I don't know exactly what worked and what didn't. But you can get an idea of some stuff that worked because people are still growing it. So, some things I know are good.
So what sort of parents were you working with, and did any of them leave a lasting impression on you, where you were like, oh, that Thai was really good?
He had his own seeds, and he had some seeds from Steve Tuck.
Marijuana.
The Haruana guy, yeah.
he traded a bunch of seeds with Steve Tuck, so he had some cool things from him. He got like Nepalese and a bunch of random IBLs. He had like hash plants, Steve Tuck, that he traded with us. Tajikistani, Uzbekistan. There's like 4 of those Middle Eastern hash plants, so I got to grow some of those. I mean, a lot of it was he was more commercially oriented, like hash plants and stuff. So like that era, for me, the early BC days was it was all about commercial plants, like wood plants, look good in a bag, smell good in a bag, and yield really big. that was basically a lot of the plants that were mass produced at that time. There was a plant called Romulan Joe Romulan that people are familiar with. It's not around anymore because it was not a fun plant to grow, and it made a lot of small buds. Like it was like a sativa frame with little indica buds on it. So it probably was a pain in the ass to trim, and probably just not a good sea of green plant, I imagine, based on the description that I've heard of it. But yeah, it wasn't like you see a lot of Romulan stuff around, and our friends that grew Romulan say that like none of that stuff looks like the original Romulan. Like the original Romulan that they grew back then was little rock hard buds that didn't get any bigger than a jawbreaker, like really small round buds. And I remember getting we bought some jars from Joe when he was bringing them into Vancouver, and they came in half-size jars, what we call salmon jars. The ounces came in half-size jars, so it was super dense. It's like form cookies. You can get it pretty dense too, like it'll fit in a smaller jar. So yeah, it was really rock hard stuff. But where am I going with this?
Smelled like pine.
Yeah, pine and meat, really meaty.
Yeah,
and kind of like curry, lemon curry.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, it was really nice weed.
Yeah, I never got to try it, so I'm a little bit jealous, right?
I'm there with you, man. I didn't get to try it either, but there's so many things we're going to have to loop back on. But seeing as we're talking about Romulan, let's smash a few out of the park. Do you have any idea or just any general guesses as to what the genetics are? You know, it's one that's so up in the air, and I don't think, like, there's a lot of things we don't know about, right? Like Chemdog and OG, but like a lot of those things we have an idea. But with Romulan, I'm like, I just don't know.
I think that's one that the story went to bed with the last, like the people that have passed away.
Yeah, kind of. I think so too.
Because it seems like there's a lot of, like, we've seen a lot of weird stories come out of stuff that we know the real story of. So it's one of those things where the story is so ridiculous that I just don't believe it. You know, like I'm highly skeptical of the different stories out there. So
I think what is it? Leafly says that Romulan is derived from a Korean landrace.
Yeah, it could be, but like
big skunk, big Korean skunk.
No, it's like Korean, and then they added in Colombian.
Yeah, that's right. Way back in the 60s. Yeah, okay. Yeah,
and then they added in. Well, that's the story. It started off with Korean and Thai and Colombian or something like that.
And every so often they would add in some stuff that was coming around that was good, right? And make it seed.
Yeah, and then they added in Afghani in the story. And
that's
then
the end.
They didn't. No, that's not the end.
Okay.
No, they didn't like the direction.
So that's right. Yeah.
So they added in more Colombian or something like that. That's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, apparently it came from Romulan, according to the story we heard.
Port Alberni.
Brace yourself. Came from a hydro store.
Yeah. Boom.
It came from the original hydro store on Vancouver Island. It was one of the original early hydro stores in Port Alberni. And so I don't know who called it Romulan, but it was a plant that was circulating in that community, which is it's on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So most of the population of Vancouver Island lives on the east coast. So I guess it's a little bit off the beaten track.
Joe would have been working at this hydro shop at that time.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, do you think the people who had Romulan back in the day did have the real Romulan?
Oh yeah, definitely. I talked to Robbie about it. A vision creator. He grew lots of it when he was living down there in the city in the early days. He had a couple houses of it, and
they had cut houses. It was one of the major cuts at that time.
Yeah.
It was circulating.
And it just kind of disappeared. It's like the era of Pink Kush. It's disappearing in front of our feet right now, right? It just happens. People get bored and move on with stuff, right? Better stuff.
Yeah, like there was back in those days, there was eras based on the predominant cuttings that were circulating. It was the cuttings that the cutting houses were choosing to propagate and sell that determined what was ultimately ending up in the market.
Yeah, definitely.
Because those cutting houses were rocking out.
That's interesting. And like, I mean, you often hear a lot of people talk about the cuts in circulation at the moment not being real. And I guess let's put that aside for the moment and instead talk about how there's like these alternative lines. Like I think like famously there was Federation Seeds, which crossed like White Rhino and then did like this whole BX thing on it. Have you ever tried those alternative Romulan cuts that like aren't the real ones but are still out there?
Oh yeah.
Do you think they're good or they're not? Like it's not the same?
They're okay, but it's totally not the same.
Yeah, they're okay, but totally not the same for sure.
Yeah, like the Romulan. I mean, what I could believe about the Romulan story is that there was a crew of guys that had seeds. Like back in those days, you got to imagine that just to be able to get seeds that were like worth something, possibly worth growing, those would have been like hugely valuable at the time. So yeah, there was seeds that would have come from Oregon and California that made it up to Vancouver Island. And there was a lot of Americans in BC back in those days. So
draft dodgers.
Yeah, so I could see that part of the story where there was guys mixing up genetics, trying to find some stuff that would work. But yeah, I don't know about the validity of. But yeah, okay. To elaborate more on those new Romulans, there's a cutting that's circulating as 79 Romulan. We've kind of figured out just by looking back, and you can look at on archive.org at emeryseeds.com. If you go back into next generation in whatever year, like 2000, early 2000s, they had a Romulan 7 of 9. So that was, I think it was like, I can't remember the description, but it was like a 7 times backcross or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, backcross.
So that's just an example of how like stories can kind of get out of whack. Like there's this cutting being circulated as 79 Romulan, but it's actually
7 of 9. See how it got misplayed, right? All of a sudden now it's pre-98, right? But it was 7 of 9. Just the wordplay and telephone, how it works, right?
Yeah, definitely. Look, it sounds quite plausible. I'd be interested to hear, have you tried any of the other related cuts to sort of Romulan? Like these are just some fan-submitted ones. So like the Alberni Pine Bud or the Romy.
Yep.
Do they stand up to Romulan or not really?
No.
It's like we're always like looking for that fucking whacker, and yeah.
There's a cutting I got from an old timer friend of mine that came from Salt Spring Island, but it turns out it was one of those next generation or Federation seed line cuttings that they just selected out that they'd been growing for years and years, but it wasn't the same. Like the cutting the Salt Spring Romulan cut that I grew, it was very single cola dominant, whereas like the original plant is supposedly
lots of buds, like
like a big mess of branches and buds, little buds.
Popcorny, maybe. What's that a word?
Well, they're not really popcorn because they're hard.
Yeah, okay. And I just want to loop back. You were talking earlier about some hash plants, and we got a number of really good questions from some of our listeners, and one of them sort of asked, that specifically there's like a number of the BC hash plants and kushes that were associated with facilities on the Vancouver Island back in like the late 80s, early 90s. And the rumor was that like they came from seed that was brought in with hash, like maybe like king hash or queen or champagne or something. Notably, White Buffalo has worked with most of, if not all of them. Do you know the backstory on any of these kushes or hash plants? And do you think they stand up to the stuff we see today?
Yeah, they're good. Do I know the story about them? No, I don't know the story about them. I just know that they came out of the motorcycle club breeding collective. Like the Nanaimo Motorcycle Club, they were the predominant importers of Central Asian hash in Canada, probably possibly in North America at that time. So yeah, there's probably more Afghani coming through the West Coast than the East Coast, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
In that way, yeah.
So I could believe it. Like apparently they pulled seeds out of blocks of hash was the story, but I don't know about that. Like I don't know if I believe those stories, just because some of those seem like polyhybrids to me. So I don't know if I believe the story. And they're pretty nice. So I would tend to in my mind, if I didn't know anything about it, I would say they're probably like a lot of stuff in like that early Canadian stuff was that early Canadian stuff came out of was from Holland seeds.
I think my favorite like cushy thing from back then is like the Special K. That's probably one of my favorites that stood the test of time.
But that's even later than that stuff.
Yeah, that's even later than that stuff, definitely.
Yeah. But so those, when I was working with Reeferman, he got 3 hash plant cuts, and 2 of them are related. One was called Purple King, and then he renamed it to Pink Kush because it had nice pink stigmas. And the other one they just called it the King. And like at that time, I just knew they're related, possibly related because they're both named King.
Yeah.
But then we've done a bunch of breeding with them over the years. So we've hit them with all sorts of things and grown out the progeny. And actually just by growing out the stuff, I would tend to think that they're not landracey things because the stuff that comes out of them is really like they seem like they're polyhybrids.
Yeah, they're less than of the whole, some of the whole a lot of the time, right? And yeah.
But they're really the thing about them is they make really awesome bubble hash.
Bubble hash, yeah, definitely.
There's something special about those 2 plants that they make a type of hash that you very rarely see in commercial or like in any weed plants, that when you go to push the hash together, it doesn't stick together, it pushes apart.
Yeah, weird trichrome.
Yeah, almost like there's like static when you apply pressure and it just pushes it apart or something. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's like they're really hard to push into when they're really fresh, like when you're not cured or anything. They kind of like just the terps, I guess, or whatever compounds are in there. But they're really it's really, really nice hash. Yeah, like the flower is not like uber potent or anything, but the hash is really nice.
Candy.
Yeah. Those 2 particular plants, the King and the Pink Kush.
Yeah.
Look, that's great because as you might have imagined, we got a number of questions from the fans about the Pink Kush because, it's so prevalent and popular over the past, decade or 2, and yet there also is so much sort of mystery around it. Just to confirm, are you saying that Pink Kush comes from a cutting that was originally called King and then he renamed it to Pink Kush, and then there was another cutting and he called that King thereafter?
Well, no, it's what they were already called Purple King and the King. But my friend, I met another friend later on who was growing those, and he called them Purple King, and he said the other one was White King or Green King. So they were just calling them. But it was just, I think they were probably selling most of it as king, whether it's purple or green, you'd be like, oh, I got a bag of king. And it's like, oh, did you get the purple king or the green king? I think that's how it went down, if I had to guess.
Okay.
But yeah, those particular cuttings were really tightly held for the longest time. And so when Reefer Man got them, he was probably one of the first guys outside of the circle to actually get them. And like my friend that I met later, he was also one of those guys that he said he would have gotten in trouble if somebody, the wrong person found out that he was growing it.
Wow. Very tightly held.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is like tighter than tight.
There you go. And like, if you had to guess the genetics, you said you think it's a polyhybrid of some sort. Do you think it's hash plant cross something, or?
It's probably like, if I had to guess, and like I said before, I have no idea, but in my mind, it would be a cross of, maybe it could be a old world hash plant that they pull out of bricks that they were hitting it with seeds that they were getting from Holland. That would be my guess, that they got something like Afghani, or like they may have gotten some hash plant seeds from Holland and mixed it with, what they were getting out of bricks. Or maybe they got a bunch of different plants out of bricks, seeds out of bricks, and were mixing them up. So I just can't say. But I do think that it was a polyhybrid. That's basically all I'm trying to say, is I think it's a polyhybrid, or both of them are. But yeah, after doing a number of different hybrids with those king cuttings, it would seem to us that the green king is the mother of the pink kush.
Yeah. Because
when you hit the pink kush, you get way more phenos out of it, and they're like way all over the place. Like it's like a really good it's a really good plant for finding wild stuff, because like it spits out stuff that you wouldn't predict would come out of there.
Yeah.
But on the other side of things, I would think it would be a really hard plant to inbreed, to try and capture what it is, what the cuttings like, unless you feminized it. To try and make a seed line out of it, I think would be fairly challenging.
Very. Yeah.
Okay. And out of curiosity, do you think it stands up to the stuff today? And if so, why do you think it's sort of falling off in popularity?
Well, it is the stuff of today.
Yeah, it is big, and it's hard to grow too. I mean, it's not the easiest shit to grow.
Yeah. Pink kush is the number one plant grown in Canada right now, I would say.
Yep, definitely.
I can't think of anything else. Maybe GMO is probably but yeah, pink kush seems to be at least here where we are.
It rules the market.
Yeah, where we are, it's all pink kush. Like literally 9 out of 10 people are growing pink kush in the whole west coast of BC. Seriously.
So just to clarify, you think it's sort of still on the uptrend, or at least it's not falling off at all?
Oh no, it's falling off the cliff, and it's like doing a 9,000-foot free fall into hell right now as we speak.
Yeah, its era is done. It's over.
Done. Yeah,
it's like stick a fork in it. It's
hopefully this fall we'll see something pop up, and we'll see this kind of.
Yeah, there's definitely I think the next trend is going to be some a bunch of flavor weed. But I think we're going to see a bunch of different stuff instead of pink kush dominating. I think we're going to see a bunch of weird stuff, because all the guys that are growing it, they now have pink kush PTSD. So
yeah, for sure.
The blue dream of Canada.
Yeah.
Well, it's just been overgrown, and the combination between in the last 6 months, the Canadian legal flower market, the Canadian legal cannabis market, has flatlined. The sales have not increased. So those guys are dropping all their prices. So they're there's a huge war basically between commercial legal weed and commercial black market weed. So basically, at the end of the day, there's too much pink kush, and the price has has to drop down to nothing basically, because there's no one's buying it. Like they're like, yeah, I got like, the guys that are buying it already have what they have, they don't need any more. And the guys and farmers being farmers, when the price of a crop goes down,
double down.
Yeah, you got to double your production. And so we're
seeing that.
Yeah, we're gonna have, obviously that situation's not gonna work out too well.
And out of curiosity, do you think you mentioned like, the next big push will be like fruity, flavorful strains. Any predictions at all? Do you think it'll be something that jumps over from California, or maybe something unique will come out of the woodworks?
Well, in Canada, a lot of guys pull stuff out of random seed stocks. And a lot of it is just like, BX, whatever, or it's just, a lot of it is name cross name kind of stuff. That's just, it's got the right names. And they'll pull stuff out of that. But definitely there's a ton of stuff coming up from the States. Like we actually have the amount of elite cuttings in Canada is pretty huge. Like it's pretty impressive actually. So I'm just saying, like, I think the fruity thing is going to be the next thing, just because that's the big trend down south. So, and we're already seeing what guys are asking for, and it's stuff that has like fruity. I call it like flavor weed. I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah. No, that works. I understand. Let me take us back for a little bit to those earlier days. And we've got some really cool fan-submitted questions here again. And they just sort of ask, in the earlier days, there was like a number of seed companies that were all operating out of the same post office on Nanaimo?
Nanaimo?
Is that how you say it?
Nanaimo.
Vancouver Island? Yeah. Was there like much collegiality, like cooperation between the different groups, or was everyone just like keeping their head down, doing their own thing?
I would say everyone was fairly independent back in those days. And the fact they were using the same mailbox just means that was a tolerant mailbox. It was the same thing in Vancouver. There's a mailbox by Emery Seeds that when the seed market in Vancouver opened up, like they all got mailboxes at that Money Mart by Emery Seeds.
Yeah, okay. So I was thinking, like, did the mail staff ever say anything? Because like you're getting like these hordes of mail from all over the world, and like the volume of packages you're sending.
Like I don't know, to be honest, I just know they tolerated it. And I mean, I don't know, like you can't, there's so much privacy with mail laws that I don't think it's really up to the staff, to determine.
Yeah.
I think that's the jurisdiction of like the postal service to determine if there's something not right going on.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, another question we got sort of around that time was, did any of the DEA raids on Mark Emery or the general crackdown around that time ever affect you or get you sort of concerned? And as a follow-up, did it affect seed sales, either going up or down?
Well, it definitely affected the seed sales that he was generating. But well, at those, like by the time he was getting busted, there was a ton of other seed companies. So the seed sales were just exploding at that time, whether you bought from Mark Emery or Kind Seeds or a bunch of the other ones. There was a bunch of them. I can't remember them all. But yeah, at that time there's a place called the Pot Block in Vancouver, and there was some buildings there that like landlords that were tolerant landlords, and they would rent out to various seed guys, like Smoking Sean was one of them, Kind Seeds, Legend Seeds, Emery Seeds, of course.
Guy down around the corner. What's his name?
Kind Seeds.
Kind, yeah.
There's a few others. Canada Seed Bank, Seed Bank Canada, Seed Bank of Canada, which was super sketch.
Dave.
But yeah, those were the original Canadian seed bank pioneers, and there was a few in the East Coast. There was the London Seed Bank,
Yep.
Chris Clay,
Yep.
Quebec Seed Bank.
Yep.
Of course, Heaven's Stairway.
Heaven's Stairway, yeah. Who else would be in there?
Well, those were the main. Those were the main pioneers.
Guys, yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Those guys.
Did it spook you at all?
Oh no. I mean, like the main concern is just being raided at your personal, grow or whatever.
Yeah, I've been raided like 3 times and through the whole rigmarole, right? So luckily we had excellent lawyers like Kirk Tusaw who stood up for lots of growers around the West Coast and helped pave the way for the MMAR program and then the ACMPR. On and on we go.
Interesting. Just to chuck things over to an older strain, I'd love to grab some perspective on the Texada time warps. Probably one of the most widely dispersed outdoor genetics in Canada, and it originates from the VC Island. Do you think this is probably the oldest Canadian clone going around? Because I think it comes from like the 70s or something, doesn't it?
Well, there's some. There's questions about anything that's that old. There's questions about. But I've grown it since the early 2000s, so it's at least 20 years old. It's hard to say. Like some of these cuttings that people think. I think people's memory. There's a little bit of memory loss involved. With a lot of these cuttings, people think that they're a lot older than they actually are. Like. Just because maybe the people weren't there and they weren't there when it emerged onto the scene, and they don't really know.
Like just we'll go back a little bit. The guys at that time on Texada, they were getting seeds sent up from Humboldt County as well, all over the hippie hash trail, and you had a lot of people that were, they weren't rich. They barely had electricity, or if they had electricity, it was the house down the road that they used once a week or something, So in that time frame, I think a lot of those things were mixing, and there was a fellow on the island that made some seeds, Mr. Lambert, and passed them out to the community, and they kept looking for the fastest finishers, right? Every year. And I think in 4 or 5 years that something like the time warp came up is the story I've heard. And
in the late 70s.
In the late 70s, around 79. And those guys didn't even have electricity. They went to their parents' house and put a fluorescent light, in the closet and took a cutting and re-vegged it kind of thing. And
they had to learn about re-vegging and cloning.
Yeah, that was like all new.
And like light, like what's the kind of light you use to grow a plant indoors to keep it alive over the winter?
And over the years, we've seen it really take a beating in terms of like how it grows. It's become powdery mildew susceptible. That thing, powdery mildew, wasn't even the thing when we were like young. You never saw it ever around, right? So how the fuck would that plant even know, right? But yeah, it's an interesting story, right? And
I personally, I assume it's an old plant just because back in the day, the old timers held it with quite a bit of reverence. So I assume it's like maybe 30 years old at least, maybe.
I know the guy that I got it from. His son, he had it the whole time. His son was alive, and his son died at the age of 20. So it's at least 20 years tagged on to what we've got.
Yeah. So theoretically, it could be from 1978, but maybe there's something added on in the 80s or whatever that we don't know about.
Yeah, there was like a lot of Camaro driving people back then, and like one thing they like to do is they'll I've been around here a long time, and they'll take genetics like time warp, indica, A3, but they'll just call it time warp, and they'll give you a cut, right? And, yeah, this is my time warp cut, But when you go and sit down and smoke with them, they're like, no, that's the Mighty Might Afghan time warp indica. A5, A3, blah, blah, blah. It's got all this shit in it that they cross together every year to get something out of the season, right? So I think, there's could be a little bit of that at play too, but
yeah, there's so many cuts over the years that people have called time warp that have been handed around that weren't time warp.
yeah.
It's the same thing with Romulan. I bet you there's like 50 Romulan cuts out there.
But the one we have is the original one that all the old people grew and verified. So
and it's good.
It's good wheat, yeah.
Yeah, so we think it's it's good enough to keep around for however long it's been around for.
I mean, it's got really cool qualities too, like the way it flowers and passes on those flowering genetics to other plants.
Yeah, it's got autoflower in it. So it has autoflower in its genetics, but as a plant, it's a semi-auto plant.
Yeah.
So when it gets root bound, it starts flowering generally.
What do you think the genetics are? Because it's obviously a sativa, right?
The closest thing I've seen is something called Nigerian Nightmare. It kind of reminds me of it, which is like a Nigerian hybrid. It kind of seems like it could be something like there's some African or Southeast Asian or who knows, like some sativa that's reasonably fast, in there. That would be my guess, that it's a mix of something something auto flowering that they mixed with something with maybe a little bit of Afghani, but maybe not.
Not a whole lot, yeah.
Because that in those days, Afghani wasn't even really
not a thing, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't even really a thing until the 80s. So.
And I like when I grow it inside, I see like a plant that's Southeast Asian and Thai-like, and when it gets into the sun, it gets more of the hashiness of like something you find in the Middle East come out kind of a little bit. But we sent it into, what the fuck was that company called again? Phylos. Nothing banged up on the family meter, I don't think, did it?
No, there's nothing related to
nothing related to it
in their database.
I mean, you hear the guys who were running around the hash trail, you hear.
Yeah, it could be like a Nepalese cross or something like that.
Yeah, something weird like that, right? Yeah. One of the cuts that came out of Texada was A3 indica, and it came out of hemp seed. People were throwing hemp seed in their yard, and it was a plant that came up that ended up, getting grown for years and years. So, had a really nice grape smell, big buds, but the weather was better back then, I think, too. We had longer summers. We've gotten more rain in the falls these years, so I think you got to keep up with the breeding, right?
Well, I think also plants are used to a specific time period. As crazy as this sounds, they're used to the environment they were born in, and obviously the Earth is it's more than slightly different. The Earth is different. The climate is different from when it was back then. So there's a lot of different things that have changed since those days. So I don't think a plant has evolved for a specific time period, and we're way past that time period. So it would make sense that plant is not adapted for the conditions right now.
Yeah, I can get down with that. And just as one final question to sort of wrap up on the time warp questions, I noticed you guys work with a plant called pine warp. Is that one that's just, in your opinion, sort of like an all-round improvement on the time warp, or is it different and sort of its own thing?
It's a commercial plant.
Yeah, it was during the time when there was a lot of outdoor growing going on the coast, and they were looking for something that was just harder nugs that would bigger nugs that would fill a bag.
Faster
finishing. The market was changing. Easier trimming for sure. More weight, totally. And it was across the tree frog was its sister, I think, and
it was possibly a cream soda cross.
It reminds me of the cream soda times the time warp.
Really. Yeah, that would be my guess
for sure. That's what it is. Nobody will tell you that, but that's what it is.
Yeah, cream soda was one of the original building blocks back in the day.
Ah, okay, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, a friend of ours on the island grew some of the mix that came from Texada, from the Texada crew, and it was definitely had some cream soda in there. In my guess, I mean my theory or whatever. But yeah, the cream Sodica, it has like when you cross it with something, it'll give you every single color combination possible. So that's kind of why some of the stuff like pine warp and tree frog has got some cool colors going on.
And the original ones were like baseball bats, you could knock your friend out with it, like boom, super thick and hardy. And yeah, the pine warp was definitely an improvement on that. But the thing that sucks about the pine warp is it has those terpenes that don't hang around a long time. So when you get into a bag of it, 2 months down the road, you're like, oh, what is this? It's got to go first, right? And that's the way it was early, so you get a higher price for your weed. If it was in like that 3 weeks earlier than the market, you get a little bit of a bump. So people were always chasing that over the years, right?
Yeah, because there'd be a drought in August.
Yeah, there wouldn't be any weed around, right? We'd be out, and those days don't exist anymore.
Yeah, so that was part of like how the indoor thing evolved, is because there was this drought in August, and to take advantage of that, you'd want to run an indoor crop, because like the price was, you could sell everything at the highest price, and it could be wet, and you get like 3,600 a pound wet.
American back then, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Interesting. And another variety I wanted to quickly ask a question about was, I noticed that you guys use a plant you call the Special Kush in the Special Kush haze. What's the backstory on that Kush?
That one is actually related to the kings. The mother of Special Kush is a plant called Queen, which is somehow related to the kings, and crossed with an Afghani.
Yeah, it's Queen Afghani, and by Vision Creator, yeah, and it's a really good Kush. That's, we smoke all the American things that come up, and it's complex. It hits hard, and it always has, right?
Yeah, it stands up to most anything indica that you can grow.
Yeah, for sure.
I noticed on your site you've also worked with an X18 plant, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on some of the various Tom Hill lines you might have worked with, because I think you see a lot of DC, like deep chunk stuff around, but you really don't see much X18 or like Pine Tar Kush stuff. What's your thoughts on his lines?
They're very consistent.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, the pine, I think the pine tar and the X18 came from his father. Those were his father's, the chemist.
Yeah.
And the deep chunk was from Tom Hill, if I recall. The deep chunk, the X18, out of those three, like I've grown all three, the X18 seems to have the most, the best flavors. And it seems to be the most commercial, like the better yield out of all of them, and more vigorous, the most vigor. Like that was the problem with the deep chunk, is it's the ones I grew anyways were they're highly inbred, so they're very slow vegging. I think the pink, I can't remember the pine tar kush, but it was very inbred too. And interestingly enough, the pine tar kush, if you've ever grown it's one of the few plants that reminds me of pink kush. Your listeners,
wow,
that have grown pine tar kush, it's fairly similar. But I haven't grown it for a long time, so I can't really say much about it. But I can say that the X18 is really nice. It's got a nice high. It's not like super potent, but it's really like it's got pretty good potency.
That's cool. And did you ever see I always read about this fabled green apple pheno. Have you ever come across that in the X18?
Oh yeah. Yeah, there's lots of those, green apple and pear, and gin. There's like gin in there. Yeah, they're pretty common actually, those phenos.
Oh, yum. I got to get into it.
Yeah.
Here's a random curveball question I've got for you guys. What are some of the more rarer narrow leaf varieties that you think the general public are not particularly aware of in terms of like the quality of the effect or maybe the unique nature of the effect? Are there any things that you think are a bit underrepresented?
Well, I think first, to preface that question, we need to like look at The various land races, what they are is they've taken regional seed stock and applied a generic name to it. So in truth, there's like each one of those has infinite versions of it with a general theme, within a general theme. But as far as answering the question, what are some things that I think everything, like except for the real old timers, I think everything's been been missing for a long time. Like
Yeah,
I mean, all that's, you can find good stuff anywhere in the tropics. It's just a matter of finding the guys that kept that knew how to select the good shit from the bad shit. The fucking the good flower from the hemp. Yeah, so like the good shit can come from anywhere in my mind.
yeah, it's more like a land rave than a land race in my mind, right? Yeah, that's the word I like to use in my brain.
Yeah, land race is kind of a controversial term to use.
Sure is.
Do you mean like in the sense that it's just like so widely misused?
Well, to me, the word landrace means plants that are selected by the land without human intervention. Because when they're like the breeders, the old school breeders, when they're breeding wheat or whatever, they would go out into the land and they would do their selections from the land races.
Yeah, interesting. So what would you call like a strain from like that a certain Afghan village has worked for, however many years historically?
I would call that a heirloom or a regional cultivar.
Yeah.
Cultivar is meaning something that's cultivated, and they're like intentionally selecting seed.
Yeah. Okay.
It could have aspects of a land race, like the pollen's coming over from the land. So yeah, it's basically heirloom. I guess. Yeah. I mean, yeah. In my mind right now, I'm thinking maybe that is a land race. If it's got pollen coming over from the land, it's got the influence of a land race. But if they're like somehow managing not to get cross-pollinated from the outside, like if let's say there's an area of Afghanistan or Pakistan or whatever where it's only just farms, where it's like so dry that you can only grow your weed plants in certain spots and it's all being farmed. Yeah, then that could be a bunch of different heirlooms with some slight cross-pollination. Or maybe extreme amounts of cross-pollination.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting to talk about, though. I mean, to think about.
Yeah, how far do you go? I mean, it's really funny, though, right?
Yeah.
Like I find it interesting how the terminology is constantly changing. Like, is this cannabis sativa? Is this a narrow leaf drug cultivar? It's hard to, there's a lot of different changes in the nomenclature that have happened in the recent history.
Yeah, definitely. And I was gonna even say, like, I agree with many of the sort of ideas you just put forward. What I've noticed is that people like to use the term heirloom to, I mean, in all honesty, if I'm going to be very reductive, it's probably just ultimately a sales thing. But people will use it to describe like a clone that's been in a certain area for a long time. And I think when I asked someone about it, I can't remember who, they said, oh, if you've been growing it in that area for 10 plus years, it's acclimatized to that environment and it's an heirloom.
Well, heirloom is just means something that's passed along, like it came from the heirs. It's a loom that came from the heirs. The thread was woven by the loom that came from the heirs.
I like it.
So, I mean, you can call it whatever you want an heirloom if it came from someone else that was hanging on to it because it was good, I mean, in my mind, anyways.
That's what matters, is that the people are doing the things that they like and keeping them from generation to generation and year to year,
Yeah. And I do believe that clones can acclimatize because every time you grow it, the plant is always adapting, and where you select the particular part of the plant where you select your cuttings from will actually have slight variations in genetics. So if you take a cut from the top of the plant, it'll be it'll have more silica dominance. To the top and the outside of the branches is more silica dominant. To the bottom and the inside of the branches is more calcium dominant. So the north side of the plant will be different from the south side of the plant, for instance.
Yeah.
There's very slight differences in the genetics.
That's really interesting stuff. You don't hear that talked about very much. While we're talking about slight variations in genetics, I forgot to bring it up earlier. When we were talking about the Iraqi F2s you did you see anything come out in the F2s that was like recessive and not in the F1s? Or were they like, quote, landrace enough that it was like largely speaking homogenous because the line was sort of pure?
No, it wasn't pure at all. It was just we only did it was a 1-to-1 selection, so it would have been those two individual plants. So you got to think of that as the F2s were kind of like a hybrid. It's probably more like a hybrid, like a F1.
Yeah.
Because it's just a shit mix, of Iraqi genetics. So, we're still, it's going to take, like, there is all sorts of variations of stuff in there. So it's going to take a few more generations to get it stabilized, looking consistent. Like some interesting terms that are used in breeding terminology are stability and consistency. And I like to think about these things sometimes. And to me, stability means a plant that you can use for breeding, that the progeny are not all over the place.
Yeah, well, little.
But a lot of people use the word stability to mean plants that don't get like term flowers.
What would you call a plant that doesn't produce hermaphrodite flowers?
A true female?
True, straight, yeah, like
true female?
An arrow, I don't know.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because like I have this discussion in one form or another with lots of guests, because it's not just in this particular example, it's replete throughout all of our nomenclature. People misuse it. And I guess it sort of all boils down to this issue of like, because some people like to be like, oh, an indica is meant to mean Indian, which is sativa, and like they go through that whole sort of thing.
What's the sativa?
And I guess it sort of boils down to this idea of, well, do I use the technically incorrect term because we both know what we're talking about, and it's like we're trying to represent that we're talking about the same idea. It's interesting, or do we like draw a line in the sand and say like we have to like really get on top of it?
In my mind, one of those terms is an academic term, and the other one's like just a regular day language.
Yeah.
So like most stoners, they don't really care about like narrow leaf drug cultivar, broadleaf drug cultivar. They just want to know, does it have a cerebral effect, or does it have more of a relaxing body effect? So I think that that's ultimately the question.
Yeah, that's definitely a hard question. Like, how do you amplify those qualities that are important enough to give it a name or give it a category? I guess it's interesting. We'll see what we come up with. Lots of people smoking weed now, so
definitely, and it's definitely something that evolves over time.
Yeah, but eventually it's probably, those terms are probably going to be thrown up like completely. They're going to just be extinct at some point, just because like it won't make any sense at some point, because everything's hybridized, and there's just so many variations that you can't just like slap a label like this one's indica, this one's sativa. But I think you can definitely say like this one's got more cerebral qualities.
Yeah, that's the way I like to do it when I'm bioessaying, is like the qualities that you like as a person, how does that reflect out in a plant, and depends what kind of person you are. If you're creative, you're mathematic, you're whatever, so like it's just it'll be interesting to see. I fucking lost myself. Don't worry about it. You can edit that out. I give up.
But Yeah, another thing about it is, sorry, you fucked me up. So, another thing about it is, with the new, all these, like we bred out, not us per se, but the community has bred out all the alternative cannabinoids. So as we rediscover all those alternative cannabinoids, we're going to have to come up with new definitions for things like, what does CBC bring to the table? What is THCV? Like, when we start having more complex combinations like THCV mixed with high THC with, if you had like the relaxing the non-cerebral terpenes mixed with THCV and high THC, what's going to happen, and then throw in some CBC, like a big shot of CBC or something like that, we're going to be moving into uncharted territory.
Definitely uncharted territory.
Like we're only dealing with 2 cannabinoids right now, or, for the most part.
Yeah, look, it's going to be wild and wonderful, and we've had a range of different predictions in the past, including people won't even be smoking weed in the future. It'll be all produced by yeast, and it'll just be like cannabinoid-infused beers, and that's all we'll do. So some interesting ideas for the future. I just wanted to quickly bring us back, though, to the past for a moment. Well, it's the present, but it's also the past. I know that in the past you guys had ran some ads in High Times, and I was interested to hear, like, what's your thoughts on High Times now versus in the past? And specifically, do you think it has any sort of real value at this point?
I don't think it had much value, other than it was something for people to,
get stoned and look at, right?
Or it was just something in culture to bring the cannabis culture.
Bringing that question into the mind of more
it's like
people.
To me, it's like National Enquirer, the newspapers you see at the grocery store in the lineup, with Kanye West did this and etc. It was a delivery vehicle for advertising. Like, let's be straight.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
And I think it was it was started by law types or something, like they knew the laws and shit, so they knew what they could get away with. But it's cool. Yeah, it's cool. Like it's cool for what it did, like break ground and get the cannabis in the general consciousness. As far as like the quality of what it was, maybe not.
And there you have it, gang. What a killer part 1. Huge shout out to C-Ray and Scabby for joining us, and a huge shout out to you for getting to the end of this episode. Make sure you check back in for part 2. It'll be up shortly. And make sure you also check out our sponsors. Seeds Here Now, best seed bank in the industry. You know them, you love them. They got the best breeders. Check them out. Koppert Biological Systems, all the best predators in the game. Beneficial feeds to keep the good mites happy, who will in turn take care of the bad mites. Get on top of it, guys. Afiparium, Spidex, Vital, 2 killer products from a killer company. Top Shelf Seed Bank, Organic Gardening Solutions, Homies Down Under. Check them out, guys. I promise you will get killer results if you use their products. And one final word for the Patreon. You guys know I love you. Please check it out. We're now doing monthly giveaways on genetics. We give away seeds every month. How crazy is that? Crickets and Cicada, Trichome Jungles, Heavy Days Genetics. Plenty more to come. www.patreon.com/the podcast. I'll see you for the next one. We'll see you.